There we go.
Recording first. Is it okay now?
Yes.
Okay. So first of all, thank you, Thomas, for accepting our invitation to for a seminar in ArchiTalks. In ArchiTalks, I mean, in Architectural Talks here at the Faculty of Architecture in our university. Before you present, I would just like to introduce you to the audience. So Thomas Stelmach is a founder and director of TSPA in Berlin. He studied architecture in Berlin and in Barcelona. His main focus and interest in sustainable urban development. Since 2001, he teaches in sustainable urban planning in an international context in several institutions and universities, Berlage Institute, Riga, Beijing, Rotterdam, Berlin. He conceived also some of the largest cities extensions in Europe and worldwide, Moscow, London, Rotterdam, Astana, Ruhr region in Germany, in Indonesia and Philippines. He is also was behind the proposal of Berlin largest urban expansion and the strategic regional vision in Berlin Brandenburg 2070. Currently, he's developing the concept for Mecca's future. He also supports several international organizations like the UN Habitat in Philippines, Rwanda, and Mozambique on urban resilience and climate change. He also advised the Aga Khan Foundation, the French Development Agency, AFD, and the German International Technical Operation, GIZ, in best practice of urban development and spatial planning. He also, from where we knew each other, he was also the founder and the behind the Aleppo Future Vision 2030. This is a city of like 3 million inhabitants, in cooperation with the World Bank, Cities Alliance, and GIZ. He's the member of International Organization of Planning Professor, ISOCARP, as well as he's appointed as member of the Strategic Advisory Board of Berlin Smart City Project. In 2016, he founded the Housing Cooperative Urban Group Berlin to develop affordable housing solution for the city. So, dear Thomas, thanks again, and the scene is for you.
Thank you very much, Maan. That was an extensive introduction, and it feels almost, well, for me, hard to believe that there's been so many things since we have met in Aleppo back in the day. Let me share the screen, and I say a few more words about what interests us at the moment here at TSPA, and how that relates to the topic of today's presentation. And thanks, of course, for the invitation, not only Maan, but the entire faculty, and of course, BAU University, and everybody who joins here today. So that in the background is the one slide I was talking about, Maan, but I will not say anything else about it. I will talk about today the intersection of nature-based solutions and modern technologies, digital urbanism, as we call it, or data-driven urbanism, and show a couple of examples from around the world. This is a diagram where you see where we've been working. You see Aleppo, as was mentioned. I will show a couple of case studies from Germany, from Europe. So basically where I am now, directly in front of the door, but also projects from very different contexts in Southeast Asia, an example from the Philippines, and in Sub-Saharan Africa, from Mozambique. And this is maybe what characterizes our work. I will not talk so much more about the office, but that we work as well in rapidly developing contexts for different clients, as well as in the European developed context, which much less growth and a completely different set of challenges in research and urban development and urban planning for a large variety of clients. But maybe more importantly, I would like to say a few words what in the last couple of years turned out to be very interesting for us at TSPA. And there's basically three things that we work towards, three objectives, and also three methods that we use. And the main objectives, I mean, this is maybe nothing new to most of you in the audience, because these are common topics, is to create environments which are resilient, so that can withstand change, disasters, possibly, and of course are also livable and most importantly accessible for everyone, not just for a certain part of the population. And today, I think with the topic of nature-based solutions, we'll mostly talk about resiliency. This is why it's bold. And on the right side, there are the three main, let's say, methodological objectives, which we try to aim at here at TSPA. We have in the last years shifted towards using quite advanced digital tools, geospatial information databases, automated analysis. I will say a few words about that. And of course, it's important that we do not just make theoretically nice, beautiful plans, but also make plans that are actually implementable. That's the second point. So a very intense focus on the process and not only on the plan. And finally, very important in that context is to share knowledge. I mean, share knowledge sounds banal, but we have seen often enough also in my work in the development context that quite good consultancy companies make a fantastic project, but in the end do not really transmit the information for, let's say, the city to turn the project into reality. Because it's just one document, but there's not enough tools, not enough sharing to really turn the project into practice. So we try to be as transparent as possible here. But let's maybe go back to the challenge. What you see here, this rotating ball, of course, you recognize that it's our planet. What is fascinating for me in this quick 1 second long video of 24 photos is that this is the only photo or only movie, excuse me, of our planet Earth an entire day that was actually taken by a satellite from this perspective, and it's not a 3D rendering from a collage of different satellites. And I find that absolutely fascinating to start with, because it shows the fragility of our planet. And we know that this fragility is challenged at the moment. Here are some numbers and facts from the last climate change report. We see the fastest sea level rise in 3,000 years at the moment. You have seen the news of last summer with a set of drought events. We are observing at the moment the minimum amount of Arctic ice coverage in the last 2,000 years and the highest CO2 concentration in the atmosphere in the past 2 million years. You know that the climate disaster is happening at the moment. The entire extent is not entirely clear, but this is definitely something that we are moving towards with. So we need to plan for it, no? We are planners, that's our profession. And that's why I highlighted the topic of resilience. There's a couple of other things we need to plan for. For example, none of us could anticipate the sudden eruption of the civil war in Syria. Here a photo from Berlin, from the center of Berlin, a demonstration to welcome the refugees into the country. And there's other unexpected event. Here's the cover from 2 years ago, the New Yorker magazine, which shows Grand Central completely empty, which is unseen of. So we as planners have the interesting challenge to plan for some things that we know of, but also to plan flexibly enough that things we don't know of are taken into account. One other big trend that we observe at the moment is the game-changing shift towards data usage and artificial intelligence. Maybe this is the biggest transformation of our time next to the climate change challenge. That through automated data analysis, completely different options to plan and to anticipate are possible. And the question I would like to raise here is, what does this mean for us as planners and designers? What does it mean for sustainable urban development? If we look at popular media, I hope you can see this video and the connection is good enough, or at least some images of it. If you look at popular media, there's generally two different ideas of how the future looks like. In science fiction, this is a movie scene from Ghost in the Shell from 2017, where I see that we move towards a dystopian city dominated by high-rise, absolute capitalism, advertisements everywhere, pollution, underground culture. Often in Asia, you know, or we have a completely different view of the future. This is from Disney's movie Tomorrowland. I can see that the buildings are white, the skies are blue. There's green everywhere, flying people, flying gardens. And it seems a future in which there's no disaster possible, a utopia, if you want. And of course, this idea of utopia is also being instrumentalized by architects that are selling this dream, like this picture by a French architect, Vincent Calbeau, or, you know, Stefano Boeri, who talks about similar things of marrying a green future with architecture. While the reality of the city might look quite different, this seems to be the standard dream of the average family, you know, the single family house with a little garden and their own car in the outskirts. And yet the reality of urban production in large parts of the world for the majority looks yet different. Either this high-rise, this is a picture from China, but it could be as well Turkey-funded social housing in Istanbul or in Turkey. And so I would like to see a bit how these standardized solutions can maybe be read in a different way. So I would like to see a bit how planning practice can change, not to say that spatial data or digitization is the silver bullet that solves all problems, but rather how we can use digitization to make better decisions, to communicate better, to make maybe planning and cities more accessible. And of course, it is our role to integrate the objectives that we might have as a society in general to be more equitable, to be more healthy, to be more green, to turn that using the best tools available into practice. So I would like to show a bit what we at the office are doing in this field and also where we see our practice moving generally. The first case I would like to show is a case directly here in Berlin. Maan mentioned it in the introduction. The Regional and City Vision 2070 for the city of Berlin, where we used geodata to take certain decisions. So in the beginning of the project, we made a quite thorough analysis, not only of the urban fabric itself, but in particular looking also at agricultural food production, here seen in yellow, at energy systems in pink, at the blue-green system, well, and blue-green, as you can see here, the water, because we wanted to ensure that we start again with actual knowledge and, well, things we know about, because again, the project was for 2070 in about 50 years. And as we saw in the introduction, it's very hard to predict if there will be another humanitarian crisis and another war breaking out anywhere in the world in 20 or 30 years. We don't know that, but the one thing we do know is certain environmental factors of the city. For example, that despite this being in the north of Europe, it is one of the driest regions in Europe. The groundwater is disappearing, all the water is surface water. So we wanted to see how we can build a resilient system. And then using that resilient system, making urban planning decisions for a future that Berlin can develop safely. So this slide that you can see here is the water system in Berlin and Brandenburg. And the city of Berlin is not even visible, but it is actually there, right there. And then we looked, after looking at the water and the urban fabric, at the main nodes of transport, at the energy system, and at the green system, to then define actually which areas in the city should be safeguarded, environmental protection, or should become available for growth, through that having very localized specific solutions where energy can be stored, let's say through elevated water storages, where we can have additional urban expansion because the public transport network, the rail network is there or easily implementable. And the digital tools helped quite a bit with that. So for example, there's a big discussion in Germany going on at the moment where to put wind turbines. There's talk about visual pollution. There's, of course, issues with permits and ownership. And in this plan, we could, for example, define areas and say, okay, where can we put wind turbines? Not only based on where public land is available, but also superimposing it with wind speeds, with view access, and with access to the existing energy grid. And like this, we think GIS systems can actually help making more reasonable planning decisions and which go beyond the political. And of course, we then looked in a bit more detail how that plays out on the ground. Here, the one example from one of our most important nodes in the outskirts of Berlin, where we show how a new transport network and green network can be established locally, or promoting new systems of urban agriculture, which are less polluting, less monofunctional, a bit more biodiverse in the agricultural areas around Berlin. I want to show another case from the city of Berlin before we move, and other cities in Germany, in fact, before we move a bit further abroad, where we found that the use of GIS tools was quite helpful. The city of Berlin has asked us a couple of years ago to help them to decide where the best spots for public toilets in Berlin are. And of course, at first we were a bit surprised that we as urban planners get asked about public toilets. We did not think this is part of our professional scope. But when we looked a bit closer, we realized that this is absolutely relevant for how people use the city. You remember one of our main objectives, the city for all. because elderly people or tourists for that matter can actually maybe not use all parts of the city if there's no public toilets. And we've heard from representatives of associations for disabled people that they actually are planning their trips to go shopping or to go to a museum or to the city around where they have facilities for them available. So what you see here is the opening of the first toilet, the prototype, after successful implementation of the project. But I want to talk a bit more about the process that we did here. And please forgive me that part of that is in German. So what we did first is to make an analysis where the existing facilities are. And then in the next step, we defined which areas are actually creating demand. So where are public facilities needed? Well, at touristic hotspots, at parks, where maybe there's nightlife or where there are a lot of children. And from there, we could create maps which show the deficit of places where there's a lot of demand, but where there are no existing facilities or other substitutes, maybe that restaurants that open their doors. And from there, we could then make a proposal of priority locations to fulfill that demand. What does that have to do with sustainability now, or with even nature-based solutions? Of course, a classic approach maybe would have just tried to spread them out evenly or spread them out according to the loudest voices of neighborhood associations or lobby groups. But with the help of the empirical tools that we used, we could support very much the participation process, which was going on at the same time. And then basically through a marriage of a participative process and this empirical rational process, we could find out how with the least expenditure, with the least resources, we could provide a maximum of citizens and users of the city with the facilities. And here you can see the map of the new locations. Now, let us go to a context which is very different, quite far away from Europe and Berlin, to Mozambique in the south of Africa, right east of South Africa, in fact, where the government of rural development and territorial development, the ministry has asked us to develop planos de estructura, structural plans, urban plans, if you want, for 5 of their cities. Now, you have to imagine that Mozambique is one of the poorest countries and least developed countries in the world, meaning data availability is much lower than it would be in Europe or in many other contexts. So we had certain challenges. But first of all, maybe to show where we are. The cities here are in the north of Mozambique, many of them along a corridor from the inland to the port cities. And you can see here a couple of impressions. Of course, demographic growth is extremely rapid. Infrastructure is very scarce. Most roads are not paved. Urban development is largely informal, happening in a semi-rural way or completely as a slum. And value creation and jobs are mostly based on agriculture, for example, on tea or on export of minerals. If we looked at the existing plans, they were, of course, largely still drawn by hand in the last decades. And the plans that are existing in the municipalities are very far from the urban reality. Even Google Maps cannot keep up. Here, for example, you see on the left side the Google Map representation of one of the cities, Alto Moloque, mainly 3 streets with a couple of side streets. While if you look at the aerial photo, which is a bit more up to date, you see that the city is considerably bigger than Google Maps well suggests. So that was our first challenge. How can we develop a system of urban plans if there's not even a clear understanding of the status quo? And there we had 2 answers to this challenge. And one was, again, thanks to a partnership with Esri and their tools, that we could use automated pattern recognition to actually find out the more or less precise amount of buildings in these cities by just recognizing the roofs from aerial photos, and have much improved urban maps of the cities than what the existing data could provide. So we could create better maps. And we were also quite stunned once we got a better grip on public sources of different international research institutions, that it was in the end possible to find some data, for example, of climate, of soil composition. And if data didn't exist, we could map it ourselves, for example, running simulations of flooding during heavy rain, or just via participation of local knowledge and our partners on site and the municipalities trying to map where are the water sources, where are aquifers, which areas are agricultural, which are mining areas, and so on. And so in the end, this combination of automated system, public open source data, and public participation to receive data enabled us to make quite precise maps, and also develop plans which talk about the urbanization trends. So what is you see the 2 arrows here, and what areas the city expanding at the moment, which areas are so fertile and important for feeding the population that they should under no circumstance being urbanized, etc. And based on this planning material, it was possible in a session of public participation to find out which is the common vision of the city. And we developed a couple of different scenarios. For example, we showed the citizens invited to the workshop 3 different options. What happens if you continue growth as usual, business as usual, we called it? How much land will be consumed in opposition to a model which is clearly a polycentric city? So I go back and forth to illustrate the difference, or the model of a compact city. And by showing these plans, knowing exactly the conditions on site and the different options, we could have a quite educated and interesting discussion with the locals, even though generally the circumstances were so difficult, and the data and the knowledge of the site was so scarce. It was possible. And mind again that maybe a majority of the participants in these workshops could not even read and write. Nonetheless, we were able to communicate well with plans, with photos, what the different options mean for the city. One maybe side effect is that we also tried then to bring this high-tech approach that we have at the same time to a very implementable, very practical level. For example, by using these different patterns and hatches, because we knew that maybe there's no color printer if this will be replicated in different neighborhoods. So we made sure that the plans can still be readable, also copied on a black and white printer. So it can become also very, very hands-on, very technical. Showing a couple of renderings, how the city could look like. And what you see here, of course, is still a very low density environment if we compare it with cities in Turkey, for example. Nonetheless, to give the citizens the tools and certain instruments and rules for a more orderly development is crucial to preempt the permanence of slums, where often the development is so disorderly that there's no infrastructure, no road access at all. So alone by giving with these plans and a couple of simple tools, the option or the possibility to reserve land for streets, to reserve land for public space, ensured that the future development of these cities is much more resilient and future-proof. I think that was about a bit more than about half an hour, so we can maybe look at two more cases. I would like to show you one more case from Germany and then end with the Philippines. This is a plan for Berlin for a city extension about 120 hectares for 6,000 inhabitants in the north of the city, where we together defined a couple of objectives. I don't want to go into detail too much, but the important challenge is that there were quite a few constraints from the city. A certain amount of green had to be maintained. There was a rail depot to be planned. There was a certain amount of land for the industry to be planned, and quite little land for urban housing development. What was the scope of the project was left white in this plan within the red border. And what is important to understand is that the neighbors of that area had loved very much the green land that they had in front of their door. So it is crucial to explain or to discuss with the citizens what it means to build higher or lower. Because the general sentiment was, we don't want any high rise in the neighborhood. And maybe you laugh of that in Istanbul, in that area, everything above 5 floors would be considered high rise and way too dense because it was very rural. But of course, the denser we go, the more green area we can protect. And this is why for ourselves as planners, but also for interaction with the citizens, we have built a digital tool where we basically could, in a very quick way, show different options of development. What you see here on the screen, for example, on the left is an input where you can paint densities, now darker. And on the right, you would see always what is the output of that. So how many apartments are possible, what are the densities, and in the middle, of course, you see the axonometry of the plan. And when you see that the user in this recording could make areas more dense now by painting these black areas, you can see the model in the middle updating. And I think this enabled in this playful way the citizens, here the users painting a park, could enable them to see, okay, if we want to provide housing in Berlin, and there is a housing crisis happening at the moment here, we need to go to a certain level, but we can also still have a nice park. And out of their exercise with this tool came then again an urban plan developed with more traditional methods. You can see here the different parks and gardens with examples of typologies, and of course a couple of renderings or collages showing the well, views of different parts of this future neighborhood. Case number 5 is a project where we focused together with ICI, the International Climate Initiative, and the United Nations, to be precise, UN Habitat, on resiliency in 5 cities in the Philippines. The project was called Building Climate Resilience Through Urban Planning and Design. And also there, we used basically a combination of engagement and workshops and rational assessment to identify the most critical areas in these cities. What you see here, for example, is the result of a workshop where citizens said where there are problems in the city or challenges, or where flooding is happening, or where traffic jams are happening. And we translated them back into a GIS map. And one important step in this project was a hazard analysis. So here you see, for example, a volcano, an active volcano in the north, the Pacific Ocean, a bay in the east, and the different colors meaning different levels of risks of landslide, volcanic eruption, flooding. And out of that, we could, in the next step, identify areas in red, which should absolutely not be developed because they're just prone to disaster, and other areas here in green or dark green, even safer, which are safe for urban development. And this, of course, in turn, can then be turned into land use plans and can be understood as a guidance how the city should develop. And on top of that, we developed on a completely different scale, on a much more local scale, a set of tools to mitigate flooding events. For example, here, how to drain or water, how to keep water on site or have it either evaporate or be absorbed by the ground. And that was basically the objective of the project, arrive at a couple of light tower or key projects that show how urban design can contribute to climate change adaptation in these cities. Like here, one example of a new main street, which uses these tools that I just described. And I want to close this project with an excerpt from a movie that we made together with the City Hall, where the mayor and the planning team themselves explain the project. I hope you can hear the sound. Let me know if not.
Cannot hear.
Oh, you said you cannot hear?
We don't hear the sound.
Okay, let me do one resharing and try again. Give me just 1 second. I think I forgot this time to click a check mark. Just a sec.
Okay.
So you see me for a second. Let me share again. Yep, I forgot this time to click. We did it during the test. And the window. Hold on, one more try. I'm almost there. Okay, now it should work. Is it better?
Stellmach is one of the partner cities of the Building Climate Resiliency through Urban Plans and Designs project. The city is looking at increasing rainfall, increasing frequency and intensity of typhoons, increasing temperature and climate-related hazards such as flooding, storm surge, and rain-induced landslide in its future.
The city, also serving as a regional center here in Eastern Visayas, is now urbanizing fast, with complex demands of services among our neighbor municipalities. A city always visited by typhoons. We are living proof that climate change is really happening.
Increasing rainfall and increasing frequency and intensity of typhoons only add to a long history of typhoon-related devastation in Ormoc. Increasing temperatures will intensify due to continuing urbanization, pulling in migration and private investments for business establishments and residential housing development. This will further add to degradation of biodiversity of natural ecosystems, Ormoc Bay and its mangroves, and the Now Lake Natural Park. Over 70 villages, home to 27,300 households, or about 109,000 people, are within flood-prone areas, and among them are over 1,800 informal settlers and close to 15,000 families living under the poverty line who will be rendered even more vulnerable by lack of capacities to adopt.
Technical support in further detailing the project under financial investment to get this ruling. We believe that with a wide cooperation, this will be very fruitful.
Our mock city intends to rise to the challenge of climate by balancing its natural resource endowments with infrastructure and nature-based design solutions while putting its people at the center of urban design.
This project is based from the Climate and Disaster Risk Assessment conducted to inform our local climate action plan. There are 68 informal settler families living in the community, exposed to flooding, storm surge, and rising urban temperature. The community was consulted from the start up to the conceptualization of the project.
Urban design plays a huge part in building climate resilience and reaping co-benefits of mitigation efforts. So how we will do things differently? Ormoc will manage its water. Resist, delay, store, and discharge. Resist flooding and storm surge through coastal linear parks and other design interventions. Delay flood build-up through permeable surfaces and nature-based solutions. Store water by developing water capture and storage interventions down to community and household levels. And discharge suitable floodwater back into the rivers and oceans by ensuring adequate filtration and water management channels. And with these approaches, the city aims to build a sustainable city that ensures people's safety, support inclusive decent housing, provide economic opportunity, and promote better environmental conditions. And this is a story that has just begun.
So that was the summary project that we did together with the City Hall, and you saw the mayor and his team present themselves. And maybe to come to an end of the presentation of this input, I want to give you a few summary conclusions. So it's maybe important, and you saw the participation or citizen engagement element in all of the projects, that we think technology is actually a good thing, but it's a good thing if it's people-centered and not technology-centered. So technology is an instrument for helping the people to have better lives. Secondly, we do think that the data-driven analysis can lead to much better, more rational, more reasonable, and especially more transparent processes, and make planning decisions more accessible for people. And finally, we think that it is paramount that we use these new instruments that we have, the data availability, to find answers for the biggest challenges that we have, climate change, and to move towards a better understanding of an urban planning practice that intersects data with the environment. And with here, some greetings from the team that did all this, and Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you, Thomas. Thank you so much for this modern and resilient presentation. In fact, it was also interesting for me, and I think for the audience also, how we can connect the urban planning, resilience, climate change challenges with data, how we use data, and how we also use artificial intelligence in these in this regard. Moving from very broad concept like the future vision of a city to a small project, which is the locating the public toilets in Berlin, which demonstrate really the how wide the concept would be, the use of data in that. For sure, also, what is really interesting is to show to the simulation of the urban expansion of a city, to see several or to demonstrate several solutions, several alternatives for which really enable transparent decision making for the future of the city, and also the hazard analysis of one of the cities, Legazpi, to decide really where we can develop the city in the future. And yeah, at the end, you summarized by the all the operation would be people-centered and not really technology-centered in case of a smart city, for sure. Thank you so much for this really valuable presentation, and I'm opening the questions for the audience, comments, inquiries, question. So please, you feel free to ask your questions. Yeah, Nilay Hojam, please.
First of all, thank you very much for this very stimulating presentation. I mean, this idea, I believe that it's not only people-centered, by the way, since you discussed about the nature, I think it takes into consideration all living things, because I think people are also the cause of this catastrophic problem somehow. But after listening the whole presentation, I thought that it's not only human centered somehow, but it takes into consideration the whole living things and nature, living and non-living things maybe. My question is also somehow related to my own field of interest. I am also interested in housing, and you know, some of the analysis, data analysis, and the projects you mentioned about the toilets, etc., just made me think about the demographic data. Do you think that it's also very critical for coming up projections for the future? Because as I know, also in Germany, the population is aging. Also in Turkey also, I can say that despite the state rhetoric, it's decreasing drastically somehow. Nowadays, the household size is around 3.3, which means that the classical nuclear families, their ratio is decreasing. Also, families have one kids, etc. And our population is also aging somehow. And this is also, I think, very much a very significant issue regarding the macro form of the city and the accessibility and everything somehow. Would you like to somehow elaborate on that?
Yes, thank you, Nilay. I need to split my reaction in two completely different parts, because as we saw, much of our work is in the rapidly developing world, and population growth, for example, in Mozambique is very, very high. In fact, we will see the African continent absolutely overtaking population development compared to the rest of the world. And so there, indeed, we, not only there, also here in Europe, but I get to that, we actually always start planning projects with the demographic projections. They can be sometimes more simple, depending on what the data is, and sometimes more sophisticated. But what has proven in these rapidly growing contexts as a very powerful tool is to basically just showing the projected population development. And often this means a doubling of population in 10, 11, 12 years at the growth rates we see in African cities, in comparison with the densities of urban development, with especially in sub-Saharan Africa being very, very low. And that often shows the municipalities that if they continue to build as they do now, that basically their entire municipality will be urbanized, and that will have very detrimental effects, be it for food production because there's just no land left, but also just talking about the cost that it takes to provide infrastructure provision, such as electricity, water, waste collection, and so on. And so with this demographic argument and the density, we have often shown very successfully African cities that they completely need to change their development model because they will just not be able to provide the services to the population that they would like to. Of course, in Europe, the situation is very different. And as you say, in Turkey too. I just come from Vilnius in Lithuania, which is one of the most rapidly shrinking populations that we observe in the world. There, the projection is that still within the century, the country will halve the population that it has today. So we are not talking about urban growth. While I need to correct myself, weirdly we are, because also Lithuania has a sprawl problem and the cities are growing by area despite the population shrinking. And this is of course also an issue and something to be discussed. But often the discussion moves much more to topics such as service provision in rural areas. So small villages and towns are losing their young population. Suddenly it might be a challenge for elderly people to even buy food because it's not viable anymore for the supermarket to maintain a shop there. It's just not financially feasible. So new ways of food distribution are necessary, or suddenly for a young generation, pupils need to go by bus or by car to 2 or 3 villages, in the neighborhood because there's just not a school anymore in every town because there are not enough pupils, which even accelerates this growth. So there we are looking at also often more community-driven solutions, how to provide services. And we are looking into ways how we can shrink in a better way, lose weight at the right points, and not just randomly. So we can actually have a huge chance to have highly well-functioning centers of productivity that are compact and urban, while maybe a much better functioning biosphere and landscape, you mentioned all beings, in the rest of the country or the environment.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hujo. Other questions? Yes, Elif Hoca, please.
Yes, maybe this is not a question. This is just asking about your opinion. Is there still hope for cities like Istanbul, for example? This is overdensity, and you really presented very nice scenarios and very detailed proposals for the future, very differentiated, so different projects. But for Istanbul, I'm trying to imagine how to implement them. I'm not a, how can I say, I'm not an expert on this topic, so I cannot imagine. So maybe you have opinions that we can discuss.
Well, thank you. It's a huge challenge, and you got me there. I try, but my first part of the answer is to agree with you how difficult it is, and maybe I come up in the meantime with something a bit more optimistic, because indeed we have seen that in rapidly growing cities, and Istanbul is a key case, the largest city together with Moscow, depending how you see it in Europe, and on the edge to Asia, that it is much easier as planners to preempt, to anticipate the planning problems. So if we have informality, if we have gecekondu, it is of course much easier to first plan with infrastructure and then have the city grow instead of trying to retrofit and to legalize and then put in the water and the electricity after the fact and to establish. It's much harder. And this is, of course, always a political problem, because the politicians need to get voters and acclaim today, not in 20 years. So, of course, the issues that politicians are looking at are the issues of today, and not so much. It is often hard for us planners to communicate, to say, okay, we need to think now of the problems that we will have in 20 years. Let's plan the city well, because that might not be the main concern, understandably, of the constituency of the politician. And maybe Maan is also much better equipped as both a planner and a former mayor to understand this ambiguity or conflict. Now, with the fate of Istanbul, I'm also torn in a way, because on the one hand, as I just said, it's harder to retrofit. On the other hand, we have seen, and these are not new ideas. I go back to Charles Landry or Richard Florida, the creative city, that innovation happens where there is many people meeting each other, where it's a melting pot, intersection of different cultures, people from all over the world, ideas get exchanged. And of course, there's hardly any better place than Istanbul, where exactly this is happening. So while the problems are huge, maybe also the potential for innovation is extreme, and maybe something will come out of it. And we have seen cities where only a decade or two ago, we thought it's impossible to make people ride the bike instead of the car. And now it's happening. And then I remember I lived in Barcelona and they said, we cannot have bicycles here because the mountain is too steep. Now it's one of the best cities to ride a bike. And it's in my own lifetime. So I'm still optimistic that also solutions for Istanbul are possible.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yes, other question, please. Okay, I'll ask a question. Sorry,
maybe a follow-up question after Elif Hocam. Actually, your projects, your designs are looking very much in line with the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations program. I would like to ask your opinion about it, actually, including the city of Istanbul. All the cities are kind of beyond maybe being saved. But do you think the Sustainable Development Goals can achieve the goals in fact? What's your opinion about that, and how can that be achieved through this, let's say, this type of efforts in urban design, especially?
I'm of course somewhat biased, as I took part in developing the new urban agenda, not the SDGs themselves, working so closely together with UN Habitat for many years. But I'm also by heart a doer and a planner, and not a writer, for example. But I have learned one thing during that time with the UN, that words and international agreements might often sound to us makers as a bit useless, but in fact they are very powerful. it is just a very slow process. And I've seen myself teams at the UN celebrate because a minister in the country said for the first time the word sustainability. And at the time I was a bit younger, I thought, what does it matter if he mentions sustainability or not? The city still has not changed, you know? Somebody just said a word. But then I realized in the following years, then if I talk to mayors in the cities of that country, that suddenly they talk about sustainability too. And suddenly the chief of the planning department of that city tells me, oh, we need to talk about sustainability. And suddenly it becomes much easier to do the project because the conversation has changed. And I think the sustainable development goals go even one step further because they have measurable criteria for impact. So they do not just try to give high-level goals, but actually also see how that works on the ground or how we can measure and track the change. So while parts of me are also critical of the slowness of international agreements and of, for example, the insufficient results of the last COP that we had now in Egypt, I still believe that these processes are necessary and they are ultimately helpful for us to do our work.
Thank you for the answer. It was very informative.
Thank you. I would like to also encourage some students that are listening to not be shy and ask a question. I would be very happy to have one.
Okay. Well, maybe they're still feeling. Okay. No questions coming from the student. I'll ask my question, but before, just comment on the municipalities. Municipalities can combine short-term with long-term process, for sure. People cannot wait 20 or 25 years or 15 years to see the outcomes of the long-term planning. That's why a combination should be done by the municipalities in order to think sustainably how a city would look like in the future, and at the same time combining efforts and plan on the short term, but these short-term plans should fall under the umbrella of the overall vision, future vision of the city. Now coming to my question, we know that urban planning is planning for the expected, which means we are expecting, foreseeing the future of the city. But you just mentioned one thing, it's planning for the unexpected. Could you please give us more details about how we can plan for the unexpected?
Yeah, there's of course a paradox in itself. We are planners, and then here I come and say, oh no, we don't know what will happen. So, you know, is our own profession obsolete? Of course it is not. Because the keyword is basically flexibility, you know? What is definitely doomed to fail is plans which can only pursue one specific future. And if that does not happen exactly as foreseen, the entire plan fails. It's fragile, it's brittle. Just to look at the literature around the black swan and all that, it's not even urban planning alone, it's also economic and social forecasting and planning. What does flexibility mean? Flexibility, well, in turn means resiliency, and that can have soft and hard factors. For example, if you look at, let's say, the cities in Indonesia, we don't know to what the next disaster will be, whether it's the next typhoon or a tsunami or an earthquake or actually the volcano erupting. And we don't know how big this event will be. But of course, what we can plan for as urbanists, as planners, are certain things to give redundancy. To, for example, have public spaces which are elevated. So if it gets flooded, you can go to a higher place and be a bit safer. Or to have main access points or exit points of the city, to not only have one of them, but have multiple. So in case one of them gets blocked to whatever disaster, that there's 2 or 3 other options to still leave the city or move around. And that can also mean soft measures. That can mean early warning systems. That can even mean politically that locally in neighborhoods and in cities, decision makers can make their own decisions and are empowered to decide, okay, now we leave the city, now we do this, instead of waiting from the instructions from above. And this is what I mean to plan for the unplannable, to basically be flexible and resilient.
Okay, thank you so much, Thomas. Yeah, I will address a last question for the audience. Is there any question? Apparently not. Yes, there is.
Actually, I have one, but I was waiting for the others. About the COVID and the urban design relations, you mentioned that in the beginning. But actually, I don't know what's in the Germany, how it's the situation in Germany, but in Turkey, it is kind of in almost all aspects of life. It seems like it's kind of forgotten again after the, let's say, effects are not much visible anymore. So does it have any permanent effects on urban design, in your opinion, the pandemic, or how would you, let's say, face the upcoming pandemics if there's going to be any? What do you think about that?
I think there were a lot of design solutions which were just attention-grabbing marketing moves, like designing public spaces with yellow circles on the ground so that everybody has 3 meters around them and that kind of stuff. I think this is forgotten again also here, and rightfully so. Nonetheless, I believe that there's a lasting impact, and an important one. I think an entire maybe part of the population, not to say a generation, look at us, for example, now, was forced to embrace digital tools, and suddenly, if they wanted or not, got used to have conferences online. We see absolutely a change in policies of companies, that people are not required anymore to come in every day 8 hours, but have much more flexibility of working remotely to a bigger or lesser extent, depending on the context, on the company, etc. So I do think, and this indirectly has, of course, big impacts on how our city works. The amount of trips that are being made, maybe even functions or things you're looking for in an apartment. You are looking now for an extra room to have a sort of workroom. So while the effects are subtle, I think they are long-lasting and will show us in the next decade a shift in how workplaces, public infrastructure, transport, maybe even local hubs with co-working hubs outside of the cities, that people do not need to commute anymore to the workplace. I think we will see subtle changes in how our cities work.
Thank you.
We have audience
Thank you.
questions.
There's Cheval, please.
May I ask something?
Yeah, sure.
Your work has a lot of elements about smart cities. And how do you see the future of smart cities?
That's a very big question. Can you help me to give me a bit of more of a hint what you are aiming at, if you may? If not, I try anyhow.
I just wondered about your perspective of the future of this topic.
Okay. I mean, I showed in the beginning of the presentation these two cliches of the dystopia, you know, where often in the accompanying sci-fi movies, also every individual is tracked and the advertisement extrapolated from today is custom made and knowledge is everywhere, or subversively undermined, or the opposite utopia where everything works. Evidently, I think neither of it is going to happen. I think cities will still be complex, sort of uncontrollable, and city leaders, planners will try to manage somehow, and it will be still this dynamic mess of control and freedom, what we have now. What I do think, though, is that yeah, I don't have a good answer. You know, I can only say that what I see is that these data tools that we have, they can be used in a beneficial way, and this is what I tried to show a bit today. Maybe I'm also a bit shaped by the discussion here in Germany, which is generally very much critical of big data. You know, of our past, where basically with the databases of today, maybe the Nazis would have a much easier time to control the population, you know, and do what they did. So we've become very careful about data accessibility. On the other hand, again, I can see how this can be used for a good cause to make cities work better. And maybe this is then my answer, that we need to carefully look what technologies allow us to do and then to choose wisely. And that will shape, besides many other things, the cities of our future. Sort of a I don't know answer, but it's the best I can do.
I hope the people that will choose that thing will carefully choose for the future generations.
Yes, exactly.
Thank you.
Okay, is there any other questions? No, so I think we came to an end. Yeah, at the end, I would like to thank you, dear Thomas, for this valuable and interesting presentation. It was really, I can say that this is really a modern presentation for me. Would you like to tell something, Salih, or no?
No,
Okay.
no, I'm just saying that.
All right. At the end, in the name of the university, the faculty, and ArchiTalk teams, we'd like to thank you for this valuable presentation, and to tell you that we have a little tradition in ArchiTalks, ArchiDesign talks at our faculty at Bahçeşehir University. We donate in our guest name. So a donation has been made in your name to SAY Foundation, helping underprivileged children for equality in education.
Oh, thank you very much. I'm very glad to hear that.
Yeah, thanks you again. I mean, thanks for also for the audience to participate, and thanks for your time and for your precious efforts.
Okay.
Thank you
also so much for the invitation. I'm really happy to be part of the program and the other many great speakers that you had. Yeah, thanks to you all, and I hope to see you soon again. Feel free to reach out to me.
We are also pleased to have you. Bye-bye. Have a nice
Yes,
continuation. Bye-bye. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
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 Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.